We have two, I think I feel very comfortable calling them thought leaders at the FDA in this space around the use of big data and mobile and social techniques for regulatory decision making, and as well as Dr. Gordon Gao, who's associate professor at the Smith School of Business and co-director of CHIDS. So what we'll do is I'm going to introduce the speakers, and then we're going to give each of them about 10 minutes or so to provide some prepared remarks. And then we're going to open it up and have an interactive discussion around mobile social informatics. And so be thinking of your questions now. And also, just to remind everyone who would like to be Twittering, I don't know if that's the right verb, tweeting, tweeting in the Twittersphere, that the hashtag is hashtag MCERSI15, MCERSI 15. So, and I have seen some people doing that, so please keep that up. So our first speaker as part of this panel is Bakul Patel. Bakul is Associate Director for Digital Health at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health at the FDA. So Mr. Patel leads policy and scientifics at the center in areas related to emerging and converging areas of medical devices, wireless and information technology. So this spans a wide gamut of things, but it includes responsibilities in mobile health, health information technology, cybersecurity, medical device interoperability, and medical device software. Mr. Patel is also the FDA liaison between the FCC and the Office of National Coordinator. He also chairs the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. He's had a number of other leadership positions in industry prior to his work at the FDA, and was instrumental in some of the guidance that's been developed over the last several years in the mobile health application space. And our second panelist, Dr. Isaac Chang, he is director of the Division of Post-Market Surveillance in the Office of Surveillance and Biometrics. He joined CDRH in 1995, and he served as a research scientist and a manager. He has a doctorate from University of Pennsylvania in bioengineering. He's conducted a lot of really fascinating research over the past decade around heat transfer, electromagnetics, and tissue injury. He's also been deputy director at the Division of Physics in the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories, and the American Institute for Medical and Biological Engineering has inducted Dr. Chang into its College of Fellows for outstanding bioengineering contributions in helping to build our nation's infrastructure for the regulation of medical devices. And my friend and colleague, Dr. Gordon Gao, who's co-director of the Center for Health Information Decision Systems and associate professor as part of in the Decision Operations Information Technology Department at the Robert H. Smith School of Business. He has a degree in electrical engineering and an MBA from MIT Tishunga, I'm not saying that right, but a joint program, as well as a PhD from the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania. So Dr. Gao's research includes interest in IT's impact on healthcare. He's evaluated the impact of computerized documentation systems on workflow. And he's an active researcher in the Health 2.0 phenomenon, including looking at patient online communities, doctor-generated ratings, and has been published in a range of top academic journals, and even won several Best Paper Awards. So I won't go in. So with that, I'm going to pause and not go through his whole CV. But and I'll just say it's a pleasure working with Gordon. He has really been in the past several years sort of on the cutting edge of sort of thinking about how social media and other phenomena can help us understand quality and transparency and other factors in healthcare. So let me turn it over to Bakul Patel, who will give some of his insights from his view as a director in FDA.
Good afternoon, everybody. My colleagues over here on the panel had slides prepared, and I'm thinking I'm the only one who don't have slides. So here's social media for you. All computer junkies can convert this into some information that will be good and into slides, right? So I have structured data, which is typed up, and then I scribbled on it, so maybe we can sort of figure that out. Having said that, I mean, Dr. Francis talked a lot about FDA's role into understanding how products, when they're out in the market, and understanding how they work, how they're used, and sort of what benefits they have. So I just put that in that perspective. And FDA's role in understanding that information is sort of figuring out how that post-market information, sort of the real life information, sort of is used in making decisions. Obviously, I'm not going to show you some impressive slides in terms of the prototypes that Dr. Francis showed, but I can tell you that it's very exciting. I think there's a lot of information. We at least at the Center for Devices talk about, the adverse event reports we get are at the tip of the iceberg. I mean, you guys may have heard this said many times. I think social media holds the opportunity for us to go peek below that tip and see what's really happening in the iceberg. So I think this is an opportunity for us to start thinking about that. On the way, I was coming from downtown, briefing one of the legislative staffers and on other topics, but I was thinking, what is so great about social media? And then I was trying to find a metaphoric analogy. Who watches National Geographic and where people tag, birds and animals and fishes? So I'm one of those people too, right? So I'm going, I think with mobile, we're tagging humans to understand, and we're tagging sort of information that's sort of going on with people and use of that. In the world of medical devices and medical products, I think that's one way to think about it is now we're going to have more information that we never had. And we talk about big data, and I actually make jokes out of that, and I don't like big data. I would say data obesity. I think we need to have figured out how to make that obese data meaningful so we can actually do something with it. Having said that, all big data obesity, or other people call large data and sort of clouds and everything, we have information around us all the time. I was just about to tweet, and then I actually stumbled upon this graphic, and I stumbled upon it before. Any of you guys know the sort of the stats on how much data is generated per minute in the US? Does anybody have a guess? I think I have some numbers. If you just quickly Google it, you'll see data generated per minute. You'll see some numbers. One of them is Pandora has 61,000 hours of music downloaded every minute, 277,000 tweets by users tweeting every minute. And then you have all this other, like 2 billion, 2.4 billion users share information. I think each of those pieces, and that's just like I'm giving you, it's a huge circle with a bunch of information on different social media, Instagram, Snapchat, et cetera, that sort of has this information. And that holds like a key for us to understand how products sort of behave. I just don't want to focus on also the adverse or sort of the use information, but I think there's an opportunity in terms of understanding sort of how the next treatment or the next sort of device or next product is going to get better, knowing how humans behave and sort of react to those products that are being used. So I'm going to pause right here. Folks will talk into great detail of how that can be useful, but you can imagine just information like this is going to be very useful. And you talk about social data inside FDA. I think we have a lot of that also. We need to sort of figure out how can we mine that social data inside FDA, not just outside, but inside FDA, to make regulatory decisions. I mean, we have so much conversation on email and et cetera that can be mined to make decisions that will sort of inform our decision making for ensuring products that are safe and effective. So I'm going to pause right and turn it over to Isaac. Thank you.
Thank you, Bakul.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I wanted to talk about social media probably from a slightly different perspective than you guys are used to talking about it. I think it's really important because, as developers, as people who actually work in this space, I think everyone is always interested in trying to figure out how to build the right tools or how to look for the right analytics. And a lot of times, one of the things that, you don't really always get the benefit of insight on is the people who actually have to use this, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you may be a developer, you might be somebody who writes analytics packages, and at the end of the day, somebody's got to use this stuff. So trying to understand it from the viewpoint of who's actually using it, To do that, I need to tell you a little bit about what we do. So this is sort of the vision of our group and what we do. We conduct the global post-market surveillance of medical devices and related emerging technologies through the regulation, collection, integration, dissemination of adverse event data to identify and communicate actual and/or potential public health risks to FDA and the public stakeholders. I won't read all this, but I will just point out a couple of things. Our group has to deal with the regulations itself. Our group has to establish them. We have to provide outreach and education support for people so that they know what to actually report to us. And then we also have to monitor, analyze, and synthesize this data so that we can actually look for signals and also trends, right? And so much of what you've probably heard today is the emphasis on how to find signals, how to find trends from this data, okay? We're also, making sure that my division, what we want to make sure is that people are actually using this information correctly, right? Because adverse event information is not just stuff that FDA uses, the public also sees this too. We want to make sure people have a really good understanding of what actually is there. And then the other part is, as a government agency, we're trying to foster growth. We're trying to foster the connection of data sources and the like. And so this goes into the greater IT post-market infrastructure that we have to develop. So everything you see on there is actually what is actually in charge in my division, and we have to deal with this. So you're actually getting a really kind of nice insight and a kind of nice mix of things. I like to throw this slide up because, oftentimes when I talk to folks in academia and, I approach students especially, one of the first things they say is they look at this slide and the first thing that goes through their head is, wow, look at all the medical technology and look at all the ways, these products are helping people. And I think the first thing you need to understand about my group is we look at this and say, wow, look at all the ways medical devices can break. Okay? And, it's not just, the simple things. There are lots of embedded things. Like, for example, you take a look at, hardware problems, you take a mechanical problem, software problems, you got interoperability problems, you got things that, you going through the whole engineering department, you could probably look at every single problem with a medical device and say, well, there's software issues, mechanical, biocompatibility issues, and the like. So then I usually like to throw this slide up there, and I usually like to, ask folks, does anybody know what this is? Somebody, shout it out. What is this? Defibrillator? It's a defibrillator, right? Okay, so actually it turns out all three of these are defibrillators, right? The one on the top corner, this is the one that you use in the ER, you watch it on TV, clear, right? The other version, that's the one hanging in the shopping mall, and it's being used by who? Not trained practitioners, it's being used by everyday people. And the last one is an implantable defibrillator, and these are all based on the same technology, right? But they've got very, very different use cases. Different people using them, different people having different experiences, different people reporting different kinds of adverse events. So the first thing you need to understand about the medical device space is it's complex, right? You're not just talking about monolithic data, you're not just talking about how do I analyze adverse event reports. I've got different points of view, and I need to understand all of those to really understand what's going on. A lot of times what I like to say is, I'll just use this as a visual aid. If this is the first time you're looking at this object, how do you understand this object? You take a look at it, you spin it around, you're looking at it from different angles, right? And what the job of doing that is you're synthesizing multiple viewpoints on an issue. To do what? To understand what you need to do with it, right? So you're looking at it from different angles, you're processing what we are trying to do at the FDA. I want to understand that adverse event from the point of view of a manufacturer, from the point of view of a patient, from a point of view of a supplier, a physician, patient, all of those points of view. That's what we're actually trying to do. So you ask the bigger question, what are analytics supposed to do for us? It's supposed to make that job easier, okay? What are the best uses of this? Why do we want to collect adverse event information? They give us insight into how devices are behaving in the real world, right? We want to know about the malfunctions. We want to know about the clinical problems. We want to know whether or not a device that was approved by adults is now being used in pediatric patients. We want to understand how it's actually going to be done once it clears FDA. We also want to monitor device performance, okay? Some things you just can't study in a clinical trial, right? For example, if I go and get myself an implant, a hip implant, and it's in me for 15, 20 years, there's no clinical trial data for that, right? It far exceeds the length of an approval process. So where am I going to get this information from? I'm going to get this information from adverse event information, stuff that's actually performance in the real world. I'm going to collect that. I'm going to synthesize it. I'm going to try to understand what actually happened and figure out whether or not it's something that I knew about or whether it's something that, is creeping up as a new problem. Third thing is, every so often you will find something that is a rare, serious, unexpected event. And we want to capture those because those represent new problems that people haven't looked at, and we want to actually take appropriate action. And sometimes, as we pointed out in the previous slide, some of these things involve human factors, right? 3 different devices, all based on the same technology. Use cases are very, very different. Okay, so I wanted to just kind of give you some sense of what a typical day was, for us, what we actually do, because again, you need to know that as the context of how you approach analytics. And in our world, we need context as well, because this adverse event information isn't the only source of information that's out there. I'll give you an example of why context is important. Here's a graph. Can anybody tell me what this graph represents? Come on, bunch of bright people. Does it help if I do this? Okay? Now watch what happens mentally when I start pointing and do this. Your understanding and your ability to actually absorb what this piece of information, now, I can just see right around the room, a couple of people over there, you're already looking up here, looking for patterns from here, right? Trying to relate the issues, trying to figure out how things work. This is what analytics is supposed to do. So to think about this and to think about, I was asked to look at the issue of what does the future of social media, how does social media play in the grand scheme of things? I wanted to actually take, and admittedly this is from the FDA point of view, I wanted to take a look at how we look at adverse event information, right? So in a lot of cases what we want to understand, and I came up with this rubric sort of the other day just to help us understand this. There's a lot of different levels that we want to understand the information. We want to understand the event. We understand the trends. We want to understand the behaviors. And we want to understand the perceptions, right? Okay, so let's walk through each one of these really quickly. What do we want to understand from the events? Events tell us about signals, right? Events tell us, here's a report that tells us what happens, and we want to actually understand what happens so that we can characterize it, so we can actually figure out, maybe the mode of failure, the actions, and the like. Okay. At a higher level, when we look at trends, what we're looking at is we're looking at patterns and mechanisms and things that actually help us. And these aren't just trends of device problems. These are trends, they could be any kind of trend. They could be maybe reporting trends. I once had a manufacturer tell me that their patient did not die. They told me that their patient failed to breathe. Okay? That is a very big change in how people are actually describing this, right? And that kind of pattern is very critical because if I'm processing information, I need to know that, right? I need to know that that is a possibility for how they're going to look at an issue. I had another one that told me the battery vented unexpectedly. Yes, it blew up, right? But you know what? If you don't know this, then how do you process information effectively, right? More than just understanding trends is the need to actually understand what's driving the trends. What are the incentives that are actually driving the behaviors that you're actually seeing, right? Because the trends, if it happens as a pattern and it happens over and over again, there may be an actual reason for it. For example, we one time were looking at implantable devices, and under our regulations, people are supposed to report to us after 30 days. Except that they don't get the device back from an implantable patient until day 20. So guess what their report says? We're not done investigating things. And then they wind up sending additional information to us in another report. And then it starts to compound and becomes more difficult to manage. Why are we doing that, right? We need to look at the patterns from the data. What's actually causing the patterns that we actually see? And the last bucket of things up here is perception. And why do we need to look at perception? Because not everybody has access to every piece of information. We have an internal view of things because we have the data. We redact some of our data and we post it to the public. Okay, but that means the public doesn't have all the data that we have. So their perceptions and their judgments of what actually is there, completely different. There's different points of view. How does this help us? When we look at this side of the graph, we're really looking at outputs. Okay, these are outputs that actually help us understand the data. What we also want to look at is outcome, right? And here's what you can do with it. When you understand the interpretations, now you can form an idea of the orientation of the group of people who are actually reporting to you because you understand their thought process. That leads you to developing models that actually helps you explain, to capitalize on that information to build models of how they may actually, predictive capability, which is what we all want. That allows you to then forecast based on a model. And then ultimately put your people and your resources in the places to capture the biggest problems that you actually want to deal with. Right? Does that all make sense? Okay, here's the problem. The problem is 90%, over 90% of all the effort that people are actually spending in looking at big data and also social media is below that line. The problem with that is now I have observations of signals, now I have observations of patterns, and they're all kind of one-off events. And so people try to forecast things, sometimes they hit, sometimes they miss, and the reason they miss is because they don't take into account the underlying behaviors that are driving those trends, right? What has to happen is that we actually need to look at some of the stuff up top. Most of the time, okay, so I'm gonna ask this question. Where do you think social media fits on this? I think from a lot of the talks that we have, most people would say the bottom half. Let's look at the events. Let's look at the trends. So I'm gonna turn this on its head a little bit and say, what if social media were really looking at this? Okay, because that's what social media does best, right? I can understand people's perceptions. I don't even go out to lunch or dinner without actually checking, to see ratings of what people said about things, right? That's not source data. That's not validated data. That's people's perceptions. And that's what I'm using to help me understand who is actually reporting to me. So, in summary, new approaches for social media. We need to focus on the right targets. We have this, right now, today, we're asking the question, what is happening? What we really need to focus on is why is it happening? We're trying to confirm signals. I'm using my adverse event data as a source, but I'm also trying to confirm signals. I need to use social media to help me understand what's driving trends. And instead of asking the question, what are we seeing? What should we be seeing, given what we know about the problems, right? So let me, in closing, I want to use a weather analogy. If we were to actually look at weather, healthcare as weather, this is what weather would look like today, right? We take pieces of information. Pulled this up last night, said College Park was going to be 86 degrees today. That's the kind of information, that's the state of our infrastructure today. I can pull out point pieces of information here and there. We don't have this concept yet of integrating it into a weather map, let alone taking it to the next step of actually doing forecasting from it, right? That's where I think we need to head. In summary, big data analytics, always going to be built around what you're trying to solve, okay? The goal of analyzing big data is to refocus your efforts on the right problems. And you need to play to the strengths of social media, explaining behavior and understanding how people think of the issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Gordon? Somebody closed your slide.
It's okay. So while you pull it up, I can start to talk.
That's fine.
It's really great that I'm the third speaker here because, I think, the previous three speakers have talked a lot of stuff that leads to my point here. So Dr. Francis, right, have been talking about the promise and the great opportunities of using social media, right? And then Dr. Patel talks about, so much data is being generated, right? We have the obesity of data. And Dr. Chen actually talks about how to make sense of the data that we collected and then how we should analyze the data. So what I'm going to talk about is something that is, I believe, very important. Once we have collected the data, we collect the right data, we know the meaning of the data, we know that a patient, fails to breathe means the patient has died. And then what we should do, right? So how to analyze the data, so which I call the curse of big data in mobile analytics. So I don't think that I need to talk more about, why we have a big data problem. So, but basically speaking, right? So the mobile devices are generating three types of data, right? The user-generated data, like the tweets and the, Facebook, right, posts that you have there. The second is the system-generated data, right, which means the server logs and other things, right? So the third is the sensor-generated data, which, Dr. Chen has talked a lot about. So basically, right, if you couple all the data generated from mobile devices with three other types of data, you do have lots of data, right? Like the pharmaceutical R&D data. Then you also have the claims data here. Then finally, right, you have the clinical data, right, captured in the EMR and the EHR. So then couple that with the social media data. So then we have a lot of data about the patients. So we have the big data problem. And as to clearly, right, we have obesity of data. But fortunately, right, we have a lot of means these days that we can match the data, right? So I see several students coming from my big data class where we talk a lot about the tools that we use. You can see, right, there are a lot of weird animals there, which is actually, right, the norm of a big data, right, industry, where it started with Hadoop, which is a little elephant, right? Then you began to add a lot more, right, animals there. So basically, if you don't know these terms, come over to talk to me. Right? So these are things that you would love to know. But anyway, right, we do have lots of tools there actually to analyze the data and to massage the data so that we can analyze. So the key issue really is about now you have the data right there, then in front of you, how do you analyze the data? And here I would argue that one of the core issues is that most time what we find is just the correlations, but not the causation or the causality. So this is actually getting a little bit concern, right, even from the big data industry. Why? Because most time, right, our focus is on how to capture data, how to save the data, right, and then how we are able to visualize the data. Then we spend actually relatively little time to think about what's really the meaning of the findings from the data. I would say, right, based on the general, right, the experience of big data, that is 80 to 90% of the time we spend is on getting the data into either right a NoSQL or even relational database, right? Then right trying to analyze data and then get some correlations. Then we are so happy with that. But then what we need is to think further, right? What really that means. For us to have actionable right knowledge, what we need is really causality, right, and not just the correlation. So like this example here, right, roster and sunrise, right, so which one causes what. So now with this, right, I want to say that there's one particular risk there about mistaking correlation with causality. So especially with big data. Why? Because you just have enormous amount of data. You can always find some correlation there that is statistically significant. Like this one. Nicolas Cage, right? So these are the films that he stars, and then the people who drown falling into a pool. You can see pretty high correlation. And actually you can come up with a very nice story, right? So why? Maybe because people hate him, right? So when his movie is out, right, people get depressed, right? And then better things happen, right? So you can actually come up with a theory that it might be reasonable. But we know that this is a purely a statistical artifact. So like this one. Computer science doctorates awarded, and then the revenue generated by our case. You can also put up a nice explanation, right? That is, right, those computer science students, right, got their degree. They're so happy they spend all their days in our case, right, playing videos, games, right? So, and the correlation is very high, 98% there, the correlation coefficient. And then this is my favorite one, Anne Hathaway. So whenever you see Anne Hathaway in the news, positive news, like she's got nominated in the certain awards, she's selected as the star in certain movies, then Warren Buffett's fortune will jump by 1 to 2%, which is huge, right? Think about how enormous, right, Warren Buffett's portfolio is. What's the explanation? This actually happens all the time, right? At least 10 times already. The reason is actually, Warren Buffett's company. What's the name of his company? Berkshire Hathaway. There's a Hathaway there. So actually, there are many, high-speed, computing devices there set up to monitor the social media sentiment of Warren Buffett's company. And then if it detects a positive sentiment, what does that mean? You need to buy the stock, right? You expect the stock price will go up. So this is why when they actually mistake, right, Anne Hathaway with the company. So that's what's going on. And again, this is useful, clearly, right? This is useful if you want to make a fortune, right, by buying and selling stocks. This is useful. And it's proven, right, to be useful. But we all know, right, this is actually the mistake that the algorithm is making by mistaking these two concepts together. So overall, what's my point? My point is that, we have lots of data. As a result, right, we can see a lot of correlations. And we are, many times, right, we are just so happy after. It's like, you have walked for 100 miles to get the data. Finally, you have the data, and then you get some analysis done, then you get the findings, you're very excited. So I want you to cool down a little bit to think about, is really there's a causality there. So why we talk about this in the big data? The mainly reason is because many times for big data, and because the size of the data is so enormous, it allows you to slice the data in many different ways. So this is something called heterogeneity in treatment effects, right? So basically, it means that the effect of a certain intervention, either drug or device or treatment, whatever, right? It works on people in different ways. Then you can always with big data, you can always find some subgroups that will either benefit from that intervention or hurt by that intervention. Think about this way, right? Suppose you have 10 variables here, and each variable has 3 levels. So this is how you categorize your patients. Then you are going to have almost 60,000 different ways of combinations. Within this enormous amount of subgroups, you are doomed to find a group, right, that will have the effect that you would like to see. So this is where we call the curse of big data. So we really want to be aware of that in our analysis. So here is another kind of curse of big data that I would like to talk about. So this actually comes from our own research at Chase. So we developed an app. So the app is used to help the patients manage diabetes. Then so it used to call Moses. Now we change the name to Diasocial. And then this app is very nice. It captures lots of data about the patients, like their Fitbit, right? There's a pedometer, and their glucose levels, the diet, exercise, medication, and stuff. So all fit into this app. And then, so we have this data. So, and we connect that right with their medical records. So then we can analyze data. So then we find one thing that is very, very positive. Patient number 11. Yeah, actually we get into this detail. So look at this patient. I don't know how easy you can read that, but so let me read this to you. So basically, this is the patient, right? We did a post, experiment survey. So ask the patient, can you describe how you use the app? So the patient said, I follow the directions. Do you find the app helpful? Yes, all of it. How has the app changed your way of managing your diabetes? So you can see, right, all of the good ones, right? I can see what's going on a daily basis, allows me to be able to correct my eating habits and see how well my medications were working. And so then how do you feel your understanding of diabetes may have changed from using the app? So before that, all I had was a glucose meter. And then with the app, I can put in food and see it wasn't good for me. By following what I put in for each day, I've been able to see my highs and lows and eating patterns. The final question, do you feel any differently about your ability to effectively manage diabetes? The answer is yes. You would think that this patient will definitely benefit from this app, right? Turns out that this is a patient that has the biggest increase in A1C. A1C is a measure, right, about the blood sugar, so in your body. So if within 3 months, this guy's A1C increased by 4.6%. 4.6 percentage point is very, very huge, actually. So normally, right, we would be about 6%, right? This guy dropped, increased over 10. So what's going on? You will never get the answer from analyzing big data. So we learned that actually he just got a new job. He's driving a truck. So once you start your new job, then your lifestyle completely has changed, and you do not have a regular meal, regular exercise or other things because this job is very, very demanding. So this is actually another issue that I hope that everyone be aware of about big data. That is, although we collect a lot of data, we have a lot of sensors, but there are things that we actually do not capture, and they are very important. Actually, this echoes, right, Dr. Chan's point. That is, we really want to know, right? So we do not want to kind of be blinded by how much data we have and be happily exploring the data that we already collected, which are easy to collect because of the sensors. There are things that the sensors cannot tell us, so we need to be careful and keep our eye on things we know and also things that we don't know, things we do not observe. So pretty much, right, that's what I want to talk about, the 2 courses about the big data. So welcome comments and discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's we'll start taking questions. So please raise your hand if you have a question. While you're thinking of your questions, I did notice during Downton Abbey, my stock raised. Kenyon Crowley. If you don't know, it's the Crawley family. Okay.
So I think one of the things that I was trying to point out was that, there's work to be done on all levels, and that's certainly true. There is a lot more people actually working, in the thought spaces on trying to find events and trends, but there are fewer people who are venturing on to actually trying to explain why we're actually seeing those trends. And, sometimes what happens is I think we get falling into the trap of, we fall into the trap of doing what we're comfortable with and doing what we are, sort of adding on and glumming on to the successes that we have in the spaces that we know, right? And I think what has to happen when we actually take a look at how information has been managed in other spaces and, the dramatic changes that have happened, in how people manage information in other fields other than health, we see right away that, you know, people have made a huge leap into trying to understand these other spaces, trying to understand the behaviors, trying to understand the perceptions, trying to develop tools in those spaces. And I think those are really ripe spaces that, you know, at least from an end user point of view, I would love to see, you know, people move into, because I think that's a huge payoff area. I think that's something that, you know, like I said earlier, I don't even go and grab a sandwich or, you know, go to a restaurant in the evening without actually researching things. I mean, I buy a product from Amazon. I'm going to read all the reviews. Why am I not doing that with my own healthcare, right? And people are trying to do that, but what they're getting is their information is all coming from the same place. And so what really needs to happen is we really need people to actually work out how to interpret other pieces of info so that they can use, you know, they can use the different perspectives to help them complete the picture in their head.
Perhaps I can add to that, if you don't mind. So, this is working. So one of the challenges I see, and we heard a lot of problems, false correlations or correlations that has unintended consequences, and then you start thinking about, you know, what's noise and what's signal in the world of social media and the information that exists as it relates to medical devices. So I think that's a very scientific problem that the community can sort of advance. I think you can think about sort of if there is a way to sort of differentiate with information. I think you can do that with information by saying, this is noise, and this correlation is actually not meaningful. I think it's going to take iterations, but if that science can advance, you know, in a manufacturing plant, there's a lot of that science in a very close concept exists today, and in the business world, it's called management science that we use for support decisions making. I think we have that opportunity to, what Isaac was saying, is learn from other industries and bring it in here. I think you do 10x of that effort in terms of understanding what's going on, because human beings are very complex in terms of, and healthcare is very complex. So if we can advance that, I think we can make really good sense of how to use that information, and not just, I would hate to be like here 2 years from now just talking about unintended consequences of bad correlations, or we can't still differentiate, you know, when somebody goes LOL, is it really LOL as laughing out loud or something else in terms of medical terms? So I think those are the kind of challenges we'll have to sort of figure out. If we could do that, I think that would be a great benefit. Yes.
With this person had their hand up, and then here in the front.
I want to comment on the example of Heather make Warren company richer. So actually, this is a very typical example when we go to ontology lectures. So our teacher will give you this example similarly, because why this problem happened, because you don't put the data into the context. So if I know that Heather is an actor, and I know this another entity is a company, or somehow I differentiate it, then it won't make a link between, it won't correlate in my ontology world. So, and also about the social media tags, I recall that, how many years ago? At least 7 or 8 years ago, in ontology world, people are discussing about the usage of social media tags, comparing them with the ontology. So giving you the background of ontology is that we classify the terms in a knowledge domain in a meaningful way, in a hierarchical way, and also related terms using formalized relations. So as for the social media tags, it is not organized, so sometimes it is not that much useful if you want to try to make it as get a meaningful output. But on the other hand, if you give all the tags the context, so the context is very important, as Chao has said in his slides that if you give every data the very rich context, also so-called metadata, then you can really use it in a meaningful way.
So let me sort of jump in. I wanted to sort of comment on something that I think touches a little bit on Bakul's comment and your comment. So one of the examples that I used, when I was talking about, rather humorous examples I was using when I was talking about how people report to us, no company wants to say that a patient died. And, I said earlier that, we wheeled the patient to, there's lots of different ways that people have described that. People have said, patient failed to breathe. We've wheeled the patient to, the morgue. All sorts of things like this. And, one of the challenges you have with trying to build an ontology that's inclusive of everything is, you kind of change your problem, right? You change your problem from actually looking at the data to actually spending all your time trying to develop the perfect ontology, right? And, in many ways, that's indicative of a problem, a bigger problem of how we're attacking signal, the signal to noise problem that Bakul talked about, right? So, we all look at this as we want to find the signal. Okay, but there's two ways of actually improving signal to noise. One is what? One is to increase the signal, and the other one is to suppress the noise. And it turns out that suppressing the noise is a whole lot easier in many respects than trying to boost the signal. And if you look at it, I try to look at this from a practical point of view. Practical point of view is what happens after you find the issue? What happens after you find the issue is, as an agency, you now have to deal with the issue, right? That means I have to have people who understand that issue. I have to have people who take action steps on that issue. So I already have, the ultimate in committing resources. I'm committing people, actual people, to actually doing those things. What is worth your time, okay? Is it worth your time to spend, to have a whole bunch of people comb through and try to sift through data and try to figure out what's valuable from it? Or is it worth your time to have a computer actually help you weed out the stuff that you don't have to look at, so that your people have more bandwidth to spend on the stuff that they actually can do better? I'll just hold it there.
So this is a fascinating discussion in the context of a fairly narrow scope, which is, what I was hearing, we're looking at post-market type of signals, as well as the potential to leverage for pre-market approvals if the gaps are filled in sometimes very well. What I'm curious about is that this is also within the context of the President's Precision Medicine Initiative, at least the way I'm thinking about it, where tremendous amounts of not necessarily social media like Twitter or Facebook, but patient-generated data will be sort of released into the ecosystem of data while we're struggling to create standards for data to facilitate things like interoperability and meaningful interpretations. And I'm curious how your work might be looking at leveraging or anticipating that particular initiative.
Well, as I said, I take somewhat of a practical approach to this, right? I'm looking at it from the point of view of there's only so many staff people that I have that I can actually have address all the signals and issues that are over millions of reports that we actually get. And so some of it is really trying. We're happy when we have tools that address any one of these issues. Tools that actually help us, capture signals better, tools that actually help us trend, tools that actually help us clean up the data, tools that actually help us gain insight into how people are thinking and what issues are issues that resonate at a more public level, right? So I don't know that there is any. I don't know that there is any exclusion in terms of how we view, space. But I think one of the things that we are trying to do is we're trying to organize it a little bit better. When I look out at a field of scientists and software vendors and people who can actually help us, and I see 10 people doing attacking exactly the same problem. What comes to mind is even the best 10 quarterbacks on a football team don't need to be on the same team because it doesn't actually help you advance things any further, right?
My name is John Stecklenburg, Jansen. I have a question about the mobile apps and specifically the Yellow Card app that was launched in the UK recently, and then the MedWatcher app that has been around here for 3 years. And the promise was, I guess, also had to do with big data. You will be able to capture more adverse events that way, make it easier for people to report. So the paper that came out recently from those researchers mentioned that about 3,000 adverse event reports have been coming in over 3 years. I think 90% of those were for one product. So what's the explanation that really in a given month, maybe 1 or 2 dozen cases come in, which compared to the huge volume that the FDA gets is of course nothing. Do you have any explanation for that or how that can be improved?
So I'm very familiar with the MedWatcher app that we have here. I'm not as familiar with the app that is the other app that you mentioned. You know, there's lots of factors in it. We worked very hard to build a tool to actually allow people another, maybe more convenient way of actually reporting to us. But the socialization of that tool may not necessarily have reached all the corners of the device space, right? I mean, if you look at how many devices there actually are, there's hundreds of thousands of medical devices, and you know, one would think that you let a tool like that out in the wild, you're going to get, you know, reports from all of them. And the fact of the matter is, it really hasn't been socialized quite like that. So I don't know if that's a partial answer to your question. I think, you know, one of the struggles, and I think Dr. Guo, you know, referenced in his talking points was that there's a lot of effort involved in just trying to get the data. And I think the problems in the last several years has always been how can we tap into new sources, how can we get data, how can we clean it up, and how can we use it. And I think we're now just getting to the point where people are saying, okay, well now I have somewhat a kludgy way of actually getting the data. Now let me turn my attention to what questions we want to answer. And so this is one of the reasons why I think this session is actually such a great session. It's such an important session because, you know, we need to bridge the gap. You don't build a bridge from just one side. You always build a bridge from 2 sides. And what the 2 sides is, somehow the technology actually has to meet the business case and the business users who actually need to use it, right? And so part of what you're hearing today is a glimpse of both views. Maybe we now are making some headway in terms of how we're actually getting the data, but now we need to turn our attention to how we want to use it.
Okay, yeah, I would like to second that point. That is, in the past, let's say, you know, I think big data really took off in around 2007. So that was when, you know, everyone's talking about that. And in the past several years, what you see is that there is a divergence between the data guy and the managers or the ones who do strategy, so or run the business. Why? Because it was really difficult to master the big data, to clean it up and then make it useful. So this is why, you know, a lot of people just focus on making the data, you know, in a usable format. But what's happening in the last 2 years is that now we're at a stage where the technology is getting much more mature and much easier to use. So I see great potential for top managers to be able to touch the big data actually through very user-friendly interface. One product called Tableau, right? How many of you heard about that? Tableau is getting very, very popular. It has an interface with the Hadoop cluster. So it allows people who are not trained as computer scientists to be able to get into big data and do the analysis. I would say that combining big data with your kind of domain knowledge and expertise, as well as, right, the goals and objectives in your mind, then that will yield highest impact.
I just wanted to sort of give a slightly different perspective. So the MedWatcher app and the app that and the forms that we have today that we expect people to fill out, and it only solves one angle of information gathering. And you know, at some point in time, we have to think about the social aspect. And the reason we all carry phones in our pockets is because it's become part of our life. I think if we can make data collection part of normal process of how people live and sort of use and perform a day-to-day task, I think that's how you collect more information and more useful information. And it's less invasive it is, the better information you'll get. I think that's one of the things. So mobile, creating an app for a form that we already have is only solving one access problem, and I think there are other things to consider, how it's used, what people are using it, and just like we hear all the time about how doctors don't have time to step away from taking care of the patient, so go fill out a form somewhere else, and that's why you don't get a lot of information. But if all that was integrated into their workflow, you will get a different outcome. So collecting that, and I think for patients and others, I think having that solution and how the social aspect of, I almost call it human engineering, should be taken into account when we're looking at tools. And again, when we create those tools, I think you need to add to that context that it creates. Will allow us to sort of figure out where that information came from and at what point, because it's not the event that's important. I think it's a lot of information around the event is also important.
So I just want to add one more point to that, which is, so, 10 years ago, you look at where we were, and if you take a look at the kind of information we get and the amount of information we get, I think 10 years ago, we were begging to get additional information, right? I mean, we were begging to get information from different points of view. Now we got a different problem. The different problem we have now is we got so much data, a lot of it conflicting data, we don't really know what to make of that, right? And that makes interpreting this a lot harder because, now you have very different points of view that are actually in there, some of them conflicting, some of them duplicative. Remember, the example that I had when I held up the little remote, right? Your job at the end of the day is you want to understand. If you're a regulator like me, I want to understand what the issue is, and I can't do that without seeing different points of view. And I can't do that if mentally I'm given disparate points of view, things that are in conflict of each other. And those are the things that are the question spots that always come up as a regulator, as I need to try to figure out what's going on. I need to understand that so that I can make the best decisions. And it's not just a regulator. As a consumer, it's the same thing. It's the very reason why the first time you go to look for any product, you're checking out every single source of information. I guarantee you, the minute you walk out of a doctor's office, you're Googling whatever he just said, right? And you're trying to figure out everything there is to know about that. And the problem with that is everybody is an expert in doing their own research, okay? I admit it, I've got flaws too in my research, right? We all do. And we all, take away our different perspectives. But how do you reconcile that? Because in order to make a public policy decision, in order to make decisions on things, every person is coming from a different place. Every person has a different set of values and perspectives. Everybody is making decisions that make sense to them, but as an aggregate whole, reconciling them becomes a big issue.
Yeah, great insights. And so another big round of applause for all our panelists. So thank you.